A millionaire leaves a safe open to test his employee, but he couldn't imagine what would happen. He left the safe open, the camera off, and his eyes attentive, ready to catch dishonesty. But what she did next destroyed everything he believed about trust. Stay until the end, because this story proves that character isn't measured by appearance. It's measured by the choices no one sees. John's mansion was too big for one man. Every room was impeccable, every piece of furniture expensive, every silence dense. At the gate, a security sign warned about alarms, cameras, and sensors. But what really kept everything running was something less electronic. A woman with light steps, a serene gaze, and calloused hands named Mary. At 48, she had worked in many homes, but none were like that one. Not because of the obvious wealth, but because of the coldness. John Smith, the owner of the mansion, was a solitary, meticulous, and above all, distrustful man. A successful businessman, he had built his fortune from scratch, and with that came the conviction that everyone wanted to take something from him. The house had 4 employees. Everyone knew that with John, it was better not to get intimate. He didn't like long smiles or conversations beyond what was necessary. Mary arrived every day before 7 a.m. She greeted the security guard with a discreet nod and walked through the main hallway to the kitchen, where she put on her apron, tied back her hair, and started her routine. She didn't complain. She had never been mistreated there, but she had also never heard a thank you. For Mary, that was expected. The work was hard but honest, and the salary, though modest, ensured that she and her adult daughter Sarah could pay the bills. Sarah was unemployed, with a degree in education, and gave private lessons when she could. Mary, even tired, helped as much as she could, sharing what she earned with her daughter. They lived together in a small rented house away from the city center. Life was simple but honest. At the mansion, Mary was the longest-serving employee. She knew the order of things, the corners that needed more care, the exact timings of each step. She even knew that John didn't like anyone touching the books in the library, much less the safe in the cabinet behind the side bookshelf. But she cleaned there with the same delicacy with which she washed the breakfast dishes, without curiosity, without haste, without intruding, just fulfilling her duty. Some might have called it submission, but Mary called it respect, and for her, silence was synonymous with prudence. One day, after finishing waxing the library floor, she paused for a moment to rest her back. She observed the sunlight streaming through the window and reflecting on the dark wood. In the corner of the room, the old safe remained closed, as always. She approached it only to dust its outer surface, as she did every Friday. The damp cloth glided firmly over the cold metal when, without her noticing, John silently entered the room. He stood there for a few seconds, observing the scene. She didn't notice him immediately. "This safe is old, did you know?" he finally said. Mary startled slightly, but turned with composure. "Yes, sir. I take care of it. I know it's important to you." John didn't respond immediately. He approached, crossed his arms, and stared at her with inquisitive eyes. "Have you ever wanted to open it?" She looked him in the eyes for a moment, then lowered her head with serenity. "Never, sir. What doesn't belong to me doesn't interest me." He made a slight sound with his mouth, somewhere between mockery and surprise. Then he turned and left as if nothing had happened. But as he closed the door, his eyes sparkled with an idea. "Let's see how far this honesty goes," he murmured, and at that instant, what he thought was a brilliant test was born, the kind of test he believed no one would pass. Little did John know that he was about to discover something more valuable than the contents of any safe, the integrity of someone who never needed to prove anything. That morning, John woke up earlier than usual. He drank his coffee without rushing, but with an restless mind. The image of Mary cleaning the safe with such care still lingered in his thoughts. He wasn't a man easy to surprise or to trust. He grew up hearing that to survive, he always had to be suspicious first. And it was precisely this distrust that had made him a millionaire. At least that's what he believed. Sitting at his office desk, he observed the house plan on his tablet. He stopped his finger over the library area. A discreet smile appeared. He picked up the phone and made a short call. "Richard, I need you to turn off the cameras in the library today. Say it's preventive maintenance. Notify all employees." He heard, "Yes, sir," on the other end and hung up. Then he went to the library, unlocked the cabinet on the side bookshelf, and opened the old safe. Inside were several stacks of money, folders with documents, and a small box with antique family jewelry. Everything there was carefully organized and valuable. Calmly, John removed 2 stacks of new bills, piled them on top of the others, but left the safe slightly ajar, not wide open, but enough to catch the attention of an observant person. He made sure not to lock the library door. Before leaving, he looked around. Everything seemed to be in place, except for the trap he had just set. Let's see. Let's see. That same morning, Mary arrived punctually, as always. She greeted the security guard with a nod, walked to the kitchen, put on her apron, and began her routine. She washed the breakfast dishes, collected the newspapers from the veranda, and organized the office. Around 10 a.m., she picked up her microfiber cloth and headed for the library. The door was ajar. "Strange," she murmured, but didn't question it. She pushed it open carefully as one would respect a temple. The room was silent. Only the sound of the cloth dragging across the surfaces filled the space. When she reached the corner of the cabinet, her gaze went straight to the safe. It was ajar. Mary stopped. She felt her heart race, not from fear, but from uncertainty. She looked around. The room was empty. She walked to the safe, saw the stacks of money exposed, the folders, everything there, as if someone had forgotten to close it. Her first reaction was silence. Her second, a step back. She didn't touch anything. She approached again, only to gently close the safe door. She checked if the latch was in place. Then she wiped down the cabinet as if nothing had happened. With firm movements, she finished cleaning the room, locked the door, and continued with the rest of her routine, without mentioning anything to anyone. On the other side of the house, hidden in his office, John watched everything on a small hidden monitor. It wasn't the official security camera, it was a micro camera discreetly, embedded in the frame of a painting in the library, the only camera he himself had installed for situations like that. He saw every step Mary took. He saw her hesitation, he saw her decision, and he remained motionless. He expected to see her hands tremble. He expected at least a touch of the money stacks, but what he saw was something rare. Respect and a posture that said, "This is not mine." John turned off the monitor, leaned back in his chair, and remained silent for a long time. Something inside him began to crumble, not because of the test, but because he realized how accustomed he was to not believing in anyone. He thought about calling her, perhaps praising her, but he didn't. He preferred silence. He wanted to see how far it would go, how far someone could maintain their dignity, even without knowing they were being watched. That night, upon leaving the mansion, Mary returned home, as always, taking 2 buses and walking a stretch to the modest house where she lived with her daughter. In her backpack, only her lunch containers and uniform. In her heart, the peace of one who knows they do what is right. Even when no one sees, little did she know that someone saw. And for John, that was worth more than any jewel inside that safe. The silence between John and Mary remained for the following days. She, as always, carried out her routine with serenity. She arrived early, greeted the kitchen staff, organized the bedrooms, and meticulously cleaned the bathrooms. She wasn't one for conversation nor for complaints. He, in turn, couldn't stop observing her, in her simple gestures, in her punctuality, in the way she cared for the house, which wasn't hers, as if it were. But above all, John didn't forget what he had seen in that recording. Honesty without an audience, the silent refusal in the face of temptation. He began to notice things he had previously ignored. He realized that Mary never secretly took leftover food, as he had suspected. She always asked for authorization, never touched personal items. If she found something forgotten, an expensive pen, a loose note, a fallen bracelet, she would place it on the kitchen table and discreetly notify someone. She treated every corner of the mansion with an almost sacred respect. One morning, while he was having coffee on the veranda, he saw her tending to the garden plants, even though it wasn't part of her duties. "I thought no one cared about these jasmines anymore," he commented casually. She smiled slightly, without stopping cleaning the leaves. "My mother used to say that jasmine smells like a new beginning." John just nodded and returned to his coffee, but that phrase echoed, "new beginning." Did he still know what that meant? The following week, an unexpected situation brought him even more clarity. It was a warm afternoon. When the doorbell rang, John, alone in his office, heard the movement. Through the lobby camera, he saw a young woman entering with a paper bag in her hands. She had her hair tied in a bun, a simple t-shirt, and a determined look. "Good afternoon, sir. I just came to deliver this to my mother. She forgot it in the refrigerator yesterday," said the cook. John recognized the face immediately. It was Mary's daughter. Curious, he got up and went to the side hallway. He stopped when he heard the two voices coming from the utility area. "Mom, haven't you talked to Mrs. Johnson yet?" the girl asked in an anxious whisper. "The rent is due tomorrow, you know." "They won't wait." "I know, daughter, but I won't ask anyone for money," Mary replied, keeping her tone firm. "We'll tighten our belts a bit more, and if that doesn't work, we'll find a way. But I won't accept anything that will shame me later." But no one would know. I would. The silence that followed was more powerful than any argument. John retreated, returned to his office, but didn't work. He stared at the wall with fixed eyes and a heavy expression. He remembered himself at 19. He worked as a construction material delivery driver. He lived in a small rented room, counted coins for lunch, and swore he would never go through that again. But for that, he had to harden. He closed doors, broke friendships, created an armor. And today, his armor was made of distrust, the distrust that made him test Mary. And now that simple woman stood firm in her posture, refusing even illicit help from her own daughter, not out of pride, but out of integrity. And that was what hurt John the Yore most, realizing that in so many years of wealth, he had never cultivated something so pure. The next day, he called his driver and asked to pass by the street where Mary lived. He said he needed to see a piece of land. The car stopped in front of a simple house with a low gate and faded paint. There was an improvised curtain in the window, clothes hanging on a crooked clothesline, and 2 pots of basil on the low wall. That was where the woman he tested lived, the woman who was now challenging everything he thought he knew about value. That night, before going to sleep, John called the company administrator and asked to release a small bonus for the household employees. It was a disguise, but the truth was that he was already planning something bigger, not out of charity, not out of guilt, but out of recognition, because for the first time in a long time, he saw someone who deserved more. Meanwhile, Mary went about her life unaware of anything. She washed clothes at night, prepared the next day's lunch in the early morning, talked to her daughter about her dreams of becoming a physical therapist. She said that maybe one day they would be able to save money again. She didn't know that she had already proven everything she needed to, not with words, but with actions. And on the other side of the city, a millionaire, accustomed to trusting only safes, began to trust people. The following days brought a subtle change to the house's routine. John, once so rigid and silent, began to notice details he had previously ignored. And little by little, the way he looked at Mary also changed. That morning, while having coffee on the veranda, he heard light, constant footsteps. Mary, with her hair tied back and a simple uniform, carried a cleaning bucket and walked through the hallway as she always did, but for the first time, he called her. "Mary, have you had coffee yet?" She turned, surprised. "Not yet, sir. I usually have it after I finish the rooms." John pointed to the table, still with warm bread and coffee. "Please help yourself. The cook made too much today." She hesitated for a second, then smiled gently. "Thank you, but I prefer to stick to my routine." "As you wish," he replied without insisting. Even with her refusal, something in that invitation lingered in the air. In the days that followed, John began to do small kindnesses. Sometimes he would ask if she needed anything. Other times, he would leave water and coffee ready in the corner of the kitchen where she organized the cloths. Mary, always polite, thanked him with a slight nod, but didn't change her demeanor. She didn't become closer or more distant. She continued to be who she always was, discreet, correct, reserved. He, however, was different. He began to perceive the loneliness of the house more clearly. The large rooms, the immaculate paintings, the sound of the clock ticking the minutes, as if no one were there. And then, on a stuffy Friday afternoon, he decided to do something he had never done. He called Mary to talk. She was in the library, dusting the shelves when he entered. "Mary," he said calmly, "could you accompany me to the office, please?" She stopped her movement with the cloth, looked at him with a little apprehension, and nodded. They walked through the hallway in silence. In the office, John indicated the chair in front of his desk. She sat with her body straight, her hands clasped in her lap. He opened a drawer, took out a white envelope, and slowly pushed it towards her. "Here is your new contract with a salary adjustment, benefits, and a new position. Starting next week, you will be the house administrator." Mary showed no immediate reaction. She just looked at the envelope as if trying to understand if he was serious. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Is this some kind of mistake?" John shook his head. "No mistake, it's recognition." She frowned, still suspicious. "May I ask why?" He rested his arms on the table, looking her in the eyes. "Remember that day you found the safe open?" Mary froze. The air seemed to weigh heavily in the office. "I just closed it and continued my work, sir. It wasn't my business." "It was a test," he interrupted bluntly, "and you passed without knowing, without being warned, without anyone watching." She swallowed hard. "I never imagined," she began, but stopped. "Why did you do that, sir?" John sighed. That was a question he himself had been trying to answer. "Because I spent my entire life distrusting everyone, because I grew up believing that if I didn't test people, they would deceive me." He paused, then completed, "But that day, you didn't deceive me, and I realized that the fault was in me." Mary lowered her eyes, holding back the emotions that were starting to rise. Gently, she replied, "Thank you for your trust, sir, but I don't think I'm an exception." He raised his eyebrows. "No, the world is full of honest people. The problem is, they never get a chance to prove it." John felt a tightness in his chest that wasn't just a phrase, it was a deeply ingrained truth. She stood up, holding the envelope firmly, and said with a calm smile, "I will continue to be who I am, with a new position or without any position." He watched her in silence, respectfully. The next morning, Mary arrived at the house as always, at 7 a.m. sharp, but now she wore a simple white button-down shirt, black pants, and a simple ID badge in her pocket. It read, "Mary, Administration." In the kitchen, the employees commented in low voices, admiring her, not for the promotion itself, but because, despite it, Mary remained the same. She picked up the shopping list, organized the week's tasks, and after lunch went to the library. She carefully cleaned the furniture, rested the flannel cloth on the table, and looked at the corner bookshelf where the safe was installed, this time locked, and the key was now hers. She ran her fingers over the wooden door and smiled to herself. It wasn't about money, it was about trust, and that she had earned. In that immense house where everything had always been silence and distrust, something began to change. And it wasn't just the routine, it was the atmosphere, the mood, the way people walked through the hallways. Mary now supervised the house as administrator, but she didn't impose authority with harsh words or cold orders. She simply acted, observed, helped, corrected with kindness, and because of that, she began to be heard. The employees, once hurried and fearful, now greeted her with respect. The younger ones sought advice, and even the cook, Mrs. Anna, famous for her difficult temper, began to prepare coffee the way Mary liked it, without her even asking. But the truth was, Mary remained the same. She still woke up at 5 a.m., still took the bus with her lunch container on her lap, still wore simple clothes and the same worn sole shoes. Her daughter, Sarah, however, began to notice the difference. "Mum, you seem lighter," she said one night, as they shared buttered bread on the porch of the simple house where they lived. Mary smiled sideways. "Sometimes when you're respected, even the air feels less heavy." Sarah held her hand tenderly. "I'm so proud of you. Very much." Mary didn't answer. She just squeezed her daughter's hand and looked at the sky. Life didn't need grand applause, just peace. At the mansion, John had also changed. Little by little, he began to circulate more through the rooms. He was no longer the rigid man who locked his office door all day. He started having lunch in the dining room. Occasionally, he would talk to the employees. And more than that, he began to observe Mary as one who learns. He saw in her an integrity that cannot be taught in books, a strength that does not raise its voice but sustains everything in silence. On one of those days, he saw Mary organizing the pantry groceries. Something in her demeanor made him pause for a second. "Mary," he called lightly, "is your daughter working?" She turned, surprised by the question. "She's trying. She's done some odd jobs here and there, but it's hard." John didn't comment anything at the moment, he just nodded. 2 days later, a phone call changed everything. Sarah had been called for a position at a partner school with a fixed salary and benefits. The recommendation had come anonymously, according to HR, but Mary knew. That night, sitting on her bed, she cried softly, not out of pity, but out of gratitude. Time passed, and the house now had a new rhythm. John abandoned his rigidity regarding schedules. Meetings with old friends resumed in the illuminated living room, where before there had only been silence. And Mary remained steadfast, always at the same time, with the same demeanor. One sunny morning brought something different. John came downstairs, smelling fresh coffee in the air. He entered the kitchen and saw Mary, with her apron tied, stirring a wooden spoon in a pot of milk. "That smell is going to make me gain weight," he said good-humoredly. She smiled without turning her face. "The secret is not to overdo the sugar." He pulled up a chair and sat at the table, something he never did before. "Can I confess something?" "Of course," she said, placing a cup in front of him. John looked at her sincerely. "I used to think that trust could be bought or signed in a contract, but you taught me something else." She sat down too for the first time and replied, "Trust is planted and takes time to grow, but when it blossoms, it changes everything." He nodded. "Not everything that shines needs to be inside a safe." The phrase hung between them. Strong, clear, true. After coffee, Mary walked to the library, opened the door with the key she now always carried with her, discreetly hanging from a cord around her neck. The room was silent, the same waxed wooden floor, the tall bookshelves and the old rug in the center. She approached the safe, ran her hand over the wood, wiped it with a soft cloth, and checked if the lock was firm. It was the same safe that had once served as a trap, the same one that had almost stained her dignity. Now it was she who protected it, not because money mattered, but because within that key was something no salary could pay: respect, trust, recognition. She gently turned the key, locked the library door, and looked around. Everything remained silent. But it was no longer a cold silence. It was the silence of one who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She turned off the light, closed the door, and went on her way. And so, in that immense mansion where everything had always been under lock and key, trust became the most valuable asset. It was no longer kept in a safe, nor did it depend on contracts, positions, or appearances. It was in the gestures of a simple woman who never needed to raise her voice to prove who she was. Mary didn't win applause or headlines, but she won something rare in this world: respect. Because a person's true value isn't in what they take, but in what they refuse to touch. And in the end, it wasn't the safe that John tested, it was his own heart. And for the first time in a long time, he understood that life's greatest wealth is being able to trust someone who never asked you for anything. Now tell me, have you ever met someone like Mary? Someone who silently taught you what integrity is? Tell us what you thought of her attitude and let us know where you're watching this video from. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like it, share it with someone special, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Because here, every story has a lesson, and every lesson can change a life. Thank you for staying until the end. See you next time.